having sex with your siblings is a pretty bad thing. But what if we made a game about it? Introducing The Coffin of Andy and Leyley, a story-focused game with light puzzling, and I do mean light because most of the puzzles fucking suck, that takes us on a journey between two siblings who dabble in a little cannibalism, first-degree murder, and the occasional demonic ritual. Now, going into this, I was fully prepared to hate on this game.
A good chunk of the fan base surrounding this game is insufferable
And seems way too comfortable glorifying the incest angle of the story. The game itself focuses on the romantic relationship between two siblings a bit more than I'd personally like, and from a pure gameplay perspective, there's honestly not much here to write home about. But after spending time with it, I walked away feeling very different than what I expected. There are video games that try their hardest to scare you. Games that rely on shock, gore, and sudden moments to make you jump in your chair because you weren't ready for what just happened. And I'm no stranger to gore and violence as a means to get a reaction out of a player, but The Coffin of Andy and Leyley didn't scare me. Not even a little bit. It did, however, make me very uncomfortable. I almost hesitate to call this a video game because it feels less like playing something and more like reading a very sad book. And it's not the kind of story you sit back and enjoy, it's the kind of story you sorta just endure. The deeper I went into it, the less it felt like entertainment and more like watching a slow, inevitable tragedy play itself out. Now, I've played plenty of horror games before, some of them genuinely terrifying, games that really put the fear of God into me, but none of them have ever left me with the same pit in my stomach that Coffin did. And the only word that really captures what I'm feeling is disturbed. I've finished the game, or at least as much of it as possible until the rest of the episodes are released, and I want to talk about my experience with this complicated and gut-wrenching story, The Coffin of Andy and Leyley. Big fat spoiler warning before we get started. We are going to do a recap of basically the entire story up until this point, just so it's easier to understand my reasoning later on. So if you are really foaming at the mouth to play this game for yourself, which I don't know why you would, consider this your one and only warning. Okay, episode 1 begins with our main characters trapped inside a quarantined apartment complex. Apparently, the tenants are suspected of carrying some kind of parasite that might be infectious, and food deliveries to the building have completely stopped. The tenants have been begging the outside world for help, but their pleas have gone ignored, leaving everyone inside slowly starving and going insane. Now, combine that setting with two siblings who already have a very strange, borderline incestuous relationship, and you can probably guess this isn't gonna end well. Ashley and Andrew spy on their next door neighbor who turns out to be a cultist, and they end up witnessing him perform a demonic ritual that goes horribly wrong. The demon he summons takes his soul and leaves his body behind. With no food left and starvation setting in, the siblings do what they feel they have to do. They butcher the neighbor's corpse and resort to cannibalism. And this won't be the last time we see this happen. The next morning, they return to the neighbor's apartment to clean up the bloody mess they left behind, but before they can finish it, the building's warden walks in and nearly discovers Ashley hiding in the closet, until Andrew comes up from behind him and backdoors him with a cleaver, killing him on the spot. So now this dude is moving like Jason Voorhees, if Jason was way less intimidating and also wanted to fuck his sister. At this point, the siblings realize they're in way too deep. Staying inside the building and waiting for help is no longer an option. They need to escape. But before they leave, they perform one more demonic ritual, offer a soul as sacrifice, and in return, the demon gives Ashley a mysterious trinket, which ends up being a pretty important plot device throughout the rest of the story. And with that, the siblings finally escape the apartment complex, armed with their newfound knowledge of demonic rituals and a very suspicious little trinket. Now, from a gameplay perspective, episode 1 is easily the weakest in my opinion. Most of the puzzles are just basic fetch quests that make you run from point A to point B. The dialogue, while not norm levels of bad, is still pretty corny at times and reads like it was written by a middle schooler who just discovered what sex and curse words are. That being said, the episode does a decent job at setting the stage for what's about to happen in the following chapters, and the incest undertones are present from the very beginning. Ashley is extremely possessive over her brother and even manipulates his girlfriend into breaking up with him simply because she can't stand the thought of another woman getting his attention. Yeah, If that made you uncomfortable, it does not get better. Truthfully speaking, by the end of this episode, I was already exhausted and ready to call it quits. Every instinct in my body was telling me to uninstall the game and go play something I actually like. But fair judgment requires a full playthrough, so despite every fiber in my being telling me otherwise, I pushed forward. After escaping their apartment building, which would later burn down and kill everyone inside of it, the dynamic duo decides to lay low in a motel until they can figure out their next move. Now, remember that mysterious little trinket that Ashley got from the demon? Well, it actually turned out to be a fortune-telling device. When you fall asleep, it shows you glimpses of the future. And the first vision Ashley gets is not very pleasant. She sees a man breaking into their motel room and slitting both of their throats while they sleep. So naturally, she wakes up Andrew and tells them they need to haul ass before it's too late. While they're outside for their would-be killer to show up, Andrew ends up sneaking into an underground cult meeting. Turns out this group is trying to summon a demon from the same realm as the one they encountered earlier. The cult leader even refers to it as the Lord Unknown. But they're a pretty shitty cult and the ritual fails, nothing happens, and Andrew leaves before he gets caught. Not long after, Andrew and Ashley spot the assassin from Ashley's vision sneaking into their motel room. They flip the script, lure him into a nearby park, and proceed to turn him into Swiss cheese, killing him on the spot before stealing his car and skipping town again. Now, low on money, the siblings decide their next brilliant idea is to break into their parents' home and take whatever cash they can find. Around this time, Ashley also learns that the trinket needs to be recharged. In other words, more people need to die. Ashley suggests the most logical solution, at least in her mind, which is to kill their parents and use their souls as a sacrifice. Subtle foreshadowing, if you know what I mean. Fast forward, they break into the house, capture both of their parents, and tie them up in the basement. Now, from this point forward, things get a little messy. Episode 3 isn't fully complete, and episode 2 branches into 2 separate routes depending on your choices, the burial route and the decay route. Each one has different outcomes. Anyways, the siblings go through with it. They sacrifice their parents, take their souls, chop them up, and cannibalize them by eating them in a soup. After that, things start to branch out depending on which path you take. I guess you could call it episode 3 or episode 3A. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to call it episode 3, and there are multiple endings. Some involve the siblings continuing to live together in their very questionable relationship. Others end with them dying. But more importantly, we start to learn a lot more about Andrew. We find out that their mother was incredibly neglectful. She got pregnant at 15 and basically forced Andrew to take on the responsibility of raising Ashley all by himself. And as the story goes on, it becomes clear that Andrew is a little odd. He doesn't just see Ashley as family, he sees her as a sort of lover. And that's when it hit me, Ashley isn't the only one who's completely fucked up, Andrew is too. He's just better at hiding it, which honestly might make him even worse. But I digress. There are a handful of things I didn't mention, like how the parents basically sacrificed their children and let them die for money, or how Ashley convinced Andrew to lock a girl inside a chest and kill her when they were little, and a bunch of other equally important lore stuff. But all you have to know is that Andrew is evil, Ashley is evil, and the parents are not exactly angels either. The entire family is just very dysfunctional, which makes a lot of sense considering how the parents just sold them out to die. If you want a more detailed breakdown of the story, there are plenty of videos out there that go way deeper into every route and every ending, but this was just to get us up to speed. Now we can move on to my actual thoughts about the game. I forgot to touch up on this earlier, but the puzzle sections of this game are pretty mediocre until you get into the little demon realm. Then you actually do get some pretty engaging puzzles that are a lot more entertaining than running around and interacting with items.
I'm realizing post-editing that I didn't talk about the demons once in this entire section, even though they're pretty important to the game and kind of in the thumbnail. But truthfully speaking, the demons as a whole are a very underdeveloped concept of this game, and they're more so there just to progress the plot than to do anything crazy. That's not a big judgment on my part though, because the game's still not done. I just thought I would mention that.
The game is a lot more story focused than it is gameplay focused, so I'm not going to harp on the puzzles too much and just leave it at that. So after giving the game a fair shake, can I say that I'm a fan now? No. Do I understand the narrative more than I did before? yes, I do. This story made me deeply uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy my time with it, and the further I got, the worse that feeling became. But at the same time, isn't that kind of the point? Because if this is meant to be a psychological horror game, then I can't deny that it absolutely succeeded. This game does its job incredibly well if the goal is to leave you feeling unsettled and emotionally affected by what you just consumed. Now, do I think the game could have been better and maybe even more enjoyable if incest wasn't such a central focus of the narrative? Yeah, I do, but at the same time, that statement is a bit of an oxymoron. The moment you remove incest from the equation, you don't have a game anymore. As uncomfortable as it is to admit, the entire story is built around the relationship between these two siblings. It's not just there for shock value, though they definitely lean into that a lot. It's the foundation of everything. Their dynamic is rooted in codependency. They rely on each other for survival, validation, identity, and that same bond is what drives the entire plot forward. So saying just remove the incest sounds simple in theory, but in reality it would cause the entire story to collapse. Now, do I think it's a good idea to center your narrative around two siblings being attracted to each other? I'm gonna say no. Even though I didn't enjoy this game personally, I can still acknowledge that it does a pretty solid job of exploring two deeply damaged people struggling to survive with the only relationship they have left. And if we're being honest with ourselves, I don't think this game glorifies incest nearly as much as the incest community glorifies this game. What do I mean by that? Anyone with half a brain who actually sat through a full playthrough of the Coffin of Andy and Leyley is not walking away thinking that Andrew and Ashley's relationship is anything other than volatile, toxic, and outright harmful. Now, I'm not saying that my interpretation is objectively correct, but I am saying that a lot of people on the internet are pretty fucking stupid. And there's a noticeable chunk of this game's community that's only here because of the incest angle, which is exactly why I was hesitant to even add this game into my Steam library in the first place. But regardless of how you feel about the game, it does tackle some genuinely complex themes. It explores codependency and how that kind of relationship can slowly destroy your sense of self. It shows the kind of unhealthy coping mechanisms people like Andrew and Ashley fall into as a means to justify their actions and avoid accountability. And most importantly, it reinforces the idea that people like this aren't just born evil, they are created into monsters. Little by little, neglect after neglect, moment after moment, until eventually the damage is already done. And by the time you start to recognize just how deeply someone was shaped by the people around them, it's already too late. So in the end, what are my thoughts on this game? I think it has a surprising amount of depth for something I initially wrote off as just an edgy incest game made for chronically online losers. Are there parts of the game that made me roll my eyes because of how painfully unfunny they were? Absolutely. Did this game make me feel happy at any point in my playthrough? No, not really. Maybe when it was over. But I'm still willing to give the game credit where it's due, because despite my personal discomfort, and despite the fact I don't even like this genre to begin with, it commits to the ideas it wants to explore, and trust me, it explores them very, very thoroughly. And I'm not gonna sit here and let my personal feelings cloud my judgment just so I can push an easier narrative. This game is a lot deeper and a lot darker than I ever expected it to be. Do I recommend the game? I think we're done here.